So Stephen A. Smith was absolutely wrong, wasn't he, about the Minnesota Timberwolves actually getting swept in the Western Conference Finals by the Oklahoma City Thunder. Now, this isn't the first thing, obviously, Stephen A. Smith has been wrong about, and I'm sure he'll be wrong about a bunch of other things as well. But 143 to 101 was the final, a 42-point absolute total thumping of the OKC Thunder. Hey, when you go out on a limb and you start talking about sweeps in the NBA playoffs, you better have a really good reason for that. And to be fair to all the other people in the media, the first game, the Minnesota Timberwolves lost by an astounding 26 points. In the second game, the Timberwolves lost by 15 points. And in both of those games, let's just be real, especially in the second half of those games, they weren't actually in those games. Now, in terms of game three, what we saw happen were some massive adjustments by head coach Chris Finch of the Minnesota Timberwolves, who should absolutely be given a ton of credit. On today's NBA Rundown, we are going to discuss what went down in game number 3 of your Western Conference NBA Finals. All right. So look, Stephen A. Smith is certainly wrong about a lot of things, and I could go down a long laundry list of the things he said that he's actually been wrong about. But predicting that the Minnesota Timberwolves were actually potentially going to get swept and that they were going to lose game 3 at home seemed to be a bit of a stretch. Even Kendrick Perkins couldn't go out on that particular limb. Perkins, before the start of the game, actually picked the Minnesota Timberwolves to win. And his reason for picking the Minnesota Timberwolves was actually spot on. Now, I follow the Minnesota Timberwolves, the Los Angeles Lakers, the Golden State Warriors, the New York Knicks. Basically, I follow the entire NBA consistently on a regular basis. I cannot tell you how many games I have watched this particular year. That being said, I have seen enough Minnesota Timberwolves games coached by Chris Finch to know that the Minnesota Timberwolves were not going to get swept by the Oklahoma City Thunder. And I also know that the game faces that the Timberwolves players had on their faces before the start of the game, where some of the people in the media were basically indicating that the Timberwolves looked scared, were absolutely uninformed in terms of how this team actually looks before a start of a game. Now, of course, Anthony Edwards is always smiling. He's always happy, and you can't take that the wrong way. That's just who he is. In terms of the rest of the players on the Timberwolves, it's not unusual for this team to have their game faces on. I mean, the team is actually still waiting for the first smile out of Jaden McDaniels this year. It hasn't happened yet. I guess maybe the only thing that could make it happen would be an actual Minnesota Timberwolves trip to the NBA Finals. So as we look at the Game 3 adjustments that Chris Finch actually put into play, when you start to actually go back and look at the film, you see that Rudy Gobert actually has 2 steals in the first quarter of the game, that the defense actually moved up and started to actually clog up the paint. We could get into some of the other specifics from an X's and O's perspective. The thing I will say about this is that Oklahoma City did not have any answers for the adjustments that Chris Finch made. Now, I'm sure in Game 4, they will have some answers, but what they've actually done, when a team gets beat by 42 points, that is different than a team losing by a point or by 8 points. It was a total thumping, and I guarantee that the Minnesota Timberwolves, while they probably won't beat Oklahoma City by 40 plus points again in Game 4, are feeling extremely confident heading into Monday night's matchup in Minnesota. In fact, I fully expect most of the media to be split on who they think is actually going to win the game. In my personal opinion, I believe the Minnesota Timberwolves will find a way to win Game 4. It won't be a romp like it was in Game 3, but there are some things that Chris Finch and the Timberwolves discovered that I think is going to make it difficult for the Oklahoma City Thunder to actually counterpunch. And that is exactly what these 7-game series are all about. Now, all weekend, I've had the NCAA softball tournament, the Super Regionals on, and those are the softball tournaments. Those are 3-game series, and in the 7-game series, certainly a lot more can occur than in a 3-game softball series. But what you see in softball is adjustments, and what we've seen out of Chris Finch in Game 3 were some massive adjustments to how they're planning on playing Oklahoma City as this series goes on. Look, at this point, it's too early to say that the Minnesota Timberwolves are going to actually win this series. But I do believe when we head back to Oklahoma City, we are actually going to be looking at a series that is all tied up. All right, I would love to know your thoughts and opinions on this particular topic. Love to hear you chime in with some of the other things that Stephen A. Smith has been wrong about in his career as well. But to talk about a sweep, as most of the national media did after Game 2, they were actually, if you will, taking a shot at the Minnesota Timberwolves head coaching staff. And Chris Finch, in his 5 years with the Minnesota Timberwolves, has done an absolutely fabulous job to this point. This is a franchise that had not really done anything at all in 25 plus years, minus the Jimmy Butler blimp. Outside of that, this team is finally back on track, a track that the Minnesota Timberwolves, quite frankly, outside of a couple Kevin Garnett years, has actually never been on. All right, for the NBA rundown, as always, I'm Dave Dubois, wishing you all a tremendous rest of your sports viewing day.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit, I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna